Hello, hello, hello. Well, today we're going to talk about the distributive property. So hopefully it's a property that you remember from middle school. So this will just be a review, and we'll be talking about how we could simplify expressions and equations and whatnot with the distributive property. So let's get started. So what is a distributive property? Basically, the distributive property states that when you're multiplying a number by a sum, you could take that number and distribute it to each of the addends. You could multiply that number by each of the addends. So there's your technical definition. And there isn't a spot for this on your notes, so you don't have to worry about writing this down. And again, this should just be review. But when you're multiplying a sum by a number, multiply each addend by that number. So there's an example for you right down here. And we're about to complete an example that's just like this for your notes. So let's take a look at this part of your notes. It's on the left side. This is just kind of a review of the distributive property. So with the distributive property, if you're multiplying a number by a sum, you could take that number and distribute it or multiply it by each of the addends. So a times parentheses b plus c and parentheses would be the same thing as saying a times b plus a times c. We distribute the a to each of the terms inside of the parentheses. And it works with subtraction as well. You have to remember that subtraction is just adding by a negative. So this is a sum as well. It's the same thing as saying a times b plus negative c. So this is also a sum, and it works the same way. It would be a times b, which would be ab, plus a times negative c, which a times negative c would be, that's a positive times a negative. If you remember, anytime we're multiplying positive times negative, opposite signs, you're going to end up with a negative. So that would be the same thing as saying plus negative AC or just minus AC. Okay? AB minus AC. Distribute the A to each of the terms on the. So this will help us out later on when we're trying to simplify, but just for review, this is number 7 on your notes. So let's just go ahead and do this one together. Try to do it on your own before I do it. You'll have a lot of problems that I want you to try to do on your own before you go to class tomorrow. But what you'll do here is, again, you'll take that negative 4. We have a number being multiplied by a sum. So we're going to take that negative 4 and we're going to multiply it by each of the numbers in the parentheses. We're going to distribute it by each of the numbers in the parentheses. So first would be the negative 4 times the negative w. So we have a negative times a negative. Anytime we're multiplying two negatives, same signs, positive. So that would be positive 4w. And then we have negative 4 times negative 10. Because remember, negative w minus 10 is the same thing as saying negative w plus negative 10. So we have a negative times a negative, which would be a positive. So that would be positive 40. 4w plus 40. That's it. So here we have one with fractions. So we have one with fractions here. The same step, same process. We multiply the number on the outside by each of the addends. So it would be multiplied by 1 6 times 3/5 and 1 6 times 18. And recall how to multiply fractions. When you're multiplying fractions, you just multiply the numerator with the numerator and the denominator with the denominator. If you remember how to cross reduce from middle school math, then we could actually reduce this fraction before we multiply. I think for some of you it might have been called the butterfly method. So we could actually just change this right away to a 1 and this right here to a 2, because the greatest common factor of 3 and 6 is 3. And then you multiply those together and you get your answer, which is 1/10 x plus, and then that would just be 18 over 6 would be 3. 18 divided by 6 is 3. And let me do this on the side. if I went too fast for y'all. So 1/6 times 18 would be 18 over 6, which 18 divided by 6 is just 3. So we have 1/10 x plus 3. So now we are going to go into combining like terms. So we did this in class today. Now we're just adding the distributive property into the mix. So here we have an expression that is number 22 in your notes. Again, please try to do it on your own before you watch me do it. So here we have an expression 6 plus 8 times the parentheses 4w minus 7 and parentheses minus parentheses 2w plus 1 and parentheses. So again, before we combine like terms, we're going to want to use the distributive property to get rid of those parentheses. So we would be left with here 6 plus 8 times 4 is 32, w, which would be 32 times w, minus, because 8 times negative 7 would be a negative, minus 56. Now here, this negative, we would have to distribute this negative too. Okay? You could think of it as a negative 1. So it's still on the outside of the parentheses. That means we're multiplying it by the sum. So this would be negative 1 or negative 1 times 2w, which would be negative 2w. So that would be minus 2w. And then here we have negative 1 times positive 1. So that would change that to a negative 1 or minus 1. Now we could go ahead and combine like terms. So we have 3 constants that we combine. So we have 6 minus 56, which would be negative 50. And then minus 1, which would be negative 51. Wait. Sorry, I wanted to do that in red since I circled it in red. And then we have 32w minus 2w, which would be 30w. And normally when we're writing expressions, we want to have the variable first, the term with the variable first. So this would be 30w, minus 51. That's it. And we'll talk more about this in class tomorrow. We'll do a few more examples tomorrow in class. But try to complete as many of these as possible. I'm talking about the ones that are in your notes. So try to complete as many of those as possible before you come to class tomorrow. When I check your notes, I'm going to expect to see more problems done than just the ones that we went over in the video. I want to see more of them. I want to see you work on more of them. So take about 5 to 10 minutes now to try to work on as many of those problems as you can. And I'll be looking at that tomorrow when I'm checking your notes. Have a great night. I will see you tomorrow.